joining all across the world. So I want to say hi and happy morning, evening, and afternoon to everybody. I'd like to take this moment to thank Women Who Code organizers for inviting me to talk at this event. It's an honor and privilege to be part of this event. Thank you so much. So our exciting talk is about building modern APIs with GraphQL. Uh, Before we hop onto the talk, let me introduce myself. I'm Pradheepa. I have around 13 years of experience in software engineering. Currently, I'm working as a senior software engineer at Discovery Networks. And thanks for my introduction. So let's get started. So the agenda, I'm keeping it simple, and I also like to warn you guys that this is going to be a 30-minute talk. So brace yourself. I try to keep it interesting and engaging. We'll build some GraphQL API at the end. So yeah, apologies if I'm keeping it boring, but let's keep it interesting and engaging. So the agenda is to start with comparing REST and GraphQL API. So REST API had been the language of APIs for so long. I think most of you who's been working in the backend and the front end would have been using at least one of the APIs in your application, either it is internal or external. So it makes sense for me to compare REST with the GraphQL API. And then we'll look into the specifics of GraphQL API because it's not REST versus GraphQL, so it has some good flavors over REST. So let's look into the specifics, and then AppSync and how this fits into the GraphQL API structure. And then this is the exciting part, building a GraphQL API. I'm just, yeah. So let's see. So let's talk about REST and GraphQL API. I just want to start because it's my morning. I want to start with some food. So let's do the burger comparison of REST and GraphQL API. So what you wanted, let's say I want to have a burger, and then I wanted to order a burger using a REST API. So what I get is like I have to send an API endpoint, which is my API.com, and then say this is a resource I want. Say give me a burger, and then I get a standard burger. What if I'm not interested in all the vegetables? What you have to do is like the person who you ordered, you have to take it out and then consume what you like, and then that's your REST API version of your burger. Let's do the GraphQL version. Let's do get burger of GraphQL. Since you know what you already want, because you know that you don't like the vegetables, let's make the specifics. Let's tell them that not to add any vegetables. Give me a bun and patty, and then give me lettuce. That's enough, right? So you already know so what I want. So let's ask the backend, the burger provider to give what you want. It makes sense. There's a little humor here. If you've seen, the lettuce is not inside the sandwich. Why? Because it's not requested like this. So you get the predictable result. You want a bun and a patty and bun. It's basically the person who is ordering doesn't like vegetable. So just the hamburger is delivered on top of lettuce. Okay, enough with the food. Let's go to the actual API request, how it looks like. This is what it looks like in the backend, in the service side, right? The client will send a request from the front end. It can be anything, your iOS or Android application or web application. Depends on whatever you want, whether you want to get the data, you want to update something else, you make some HTTP calls, and then server will respond, okay, with the response. Typically JSON, but it could be anything. The most popular format is the JSON format. So let's do the GraphQL API comparison. So what I need is like the front end will make a post call. This is something to note. And then it always should have the payload because it has to ask what they wanted. So it makes a payload call and then it sends to the GraphQL server. So GraphQL server understands this query, what this person is requesting, and then fetch the data from the data source and then it gives it back. Okay, let's do this. I just took GitHub API because it supports both GraphQL and REST API. I'm just going to compare it with the burger which we ordered. I want a user information, users Pradheepa. Let's say I'm building a portfolio website. What I wanted is my name, the bio, and the list of repositories, maybe, right? So what I'm getting is like all this information, just the standard burger, right? I'm not interested in all these things, but what I have to do is like I have to fish it out. I don't need all these things. I pick only I want. Wait a minute. I also want repositories, but I don't find it here. So what I have to do, there was a URL given here. So what I have to do is like fetch API call, another API call, use this, and then get my repo. So this is what we call something as overfetching and underfetching. If I mean, which I show in the single example, right? Um, which all the information which I don't want, I got, and the information I needed, I didn't get it. So this is something like with the REST API, we have overfetching and underfetching. What about GraphQL of GitHub API? I know what I want, so I'm just querying and sending the payload, and then I get the information. This saves your payload size is very less, and then it serves even if the network latency. I mean, if you have a very small, slow network or something, this can work pretty well. So that's one of the advantage of. I mean, I would say the major advantage of going to GraphQL API. So I'm going to make a short summary because we're going to look into the specifics of GraphQL API. So GraphQL is an API just like REST API, which I show in the Graph API GitHub API request. It is similar. You don't know anything. You just make a curl call, or you just make a post or a get call with a query, and then you get the data. No difference. Send the authentication header, whatever it is. But the difference is you ask for what you want. Most of the time, the clients know what they want. It's not something like have to give everything and then they have to fish it out. So this is like putting the front end first. So you ask for what you want. You use only post to send data. It is also possible that you can send a query in the get call, but you know it gets like messy when you have to put everything in the URL and get the predictable results. I think we made the point of GraphQL so far. So let's look into the specifics of GraphQL server. So what does a GraphQL server contain? First, it has to understand the query that you make, right? So that there should be a provision for something to understand the GraphQL query, and then there should be a runtime to understand the query and then fetch the corresponding data source. For example, if it's a REST, if it's a microservice, or it's a database, the GraphQL server will have to make a specific call. So it need two things. One is like, what are all the queries that I'm going to support? So it's kind of a standard document. And then what are all the data sources I have to connect to? I mean, how will I connect to the data source? So I'm just picking only this part, and then let's see what is it made of. One is we call as GraphQL schema, which is like if you know RAML or Swagger API or something, you know that you have seen the documentation wherein what all the REST API that is being supported, right? But that is actually created apart from your application. This is like you manage it manually. But GraphQL schema is something like this is the standard documentation that any client has to adhere to. So that is like documentation built inside it. So the schema will tell you what are all the queries that I will support, what are all the things you can, what fields I can provide. So that is like that's like a good thing for front end team to understand before. I mean, you don't have it. The documentation is always in adherence to the query that's being provided. It's not maintained separately. The second one is the resolver, which we mentioned, which is like which I mentioned, right? So let's say you want some query, like in our GitHub, I wanted the viewer's information. So there might be multiple APIs. So there should be a logic, business logic, which translates the user or the login email address to the specific data. So majorly, these two are the things that GraphQL server is made of. So this is what we are going to build in our demo. I just put the Women Who Code conference taken into account. So one is like, let's say someone is building the event a page, for example, and then they wanted to know who are all the users logged in and are seeing this talk. So they have to call get users query, and then who are all the speakers and what are all the speaker information, what's their name, email address, and all this stuff. And then we'll get a schedule. So let's say these are all the query that we are going to build. So this how a GraphQL schema looks like, a predefined thing. So you have to say type query, and then you have to mention any what all the query it's going to support. And then these are all objects like event or speaker, where we have to define it again here. So string or integer, I just for the simplicity I've added everything as string, but it supports all the basic scalars. um, the other thing is like the parenthesis, you see, this means it's an array. For example, get schedule, it's an array of events. It can all the events it can list. And for the speaker, there is a speakers list. It's an array. And the other thing to note is the exclamatory mark. The exclamatory mark means that this value should exist. This is kind of type checking in a graphical schema. So even if the data source does not provide, the schema validates here. Let's say the data source, the name is wrong, so it fails here itself. So you don't have to propagate to the front end. So this is kind of a null check which is being done. So we know that there is a query, but what are all the other operations it supports? We know in REST API there is something called, we update the data, we delete the data, right? We call something called put and delete. This is equivalent to what we call in GraphQL as mutation. You change something, the data, that's called mutation. Query, which you already know, it's like you're just getting the information, which is equal to get. So if you want to update, you can call a mutation on top of it. Subscription, which is unique to GraphQL, where you have to observe some events, for example, like a live chat or something. You can use subscription for that. It keeps the connections between the front client and the GraphQL server live. So whenever there's a change on event, for example, let's say some event is deleted or some event is happening on live, you can subscribe to this event and then do something about it. So again, we'll summarize it. The specifics of GraphQL schema. There are no overfetching or underfetching of.
If we define the schema definition, which is defined in the schema definition language,
It's very important because it's not it's language agnostic. So you can have a JavaScript based GraphQL server or a Java, Scala, or whatever. So the schema definition is independent of it. That's more important here. The other one is the strongly typed, which we validated. For example, when we mention speaker, then the name should be of string. So there are some languages which does not do the type check. So this is useful for them. And there is a documentation support, which I mentioned. So documentation is like built in within the schema. So you don't have to maintain a different documentation over it. So now I'm going to take a moment. I intentionally placed the definition of GraphQL here because before if you add it, if you read this, you will not understand because all the things that we have discussed so far is all condensed into the single paragraph. So I'm just going to mention, read it so that we cover everything. So what is a GraphQL? It's a query language for API. Obviously, we know we send a query payload, and then it has a runtime, which we are going to call as a resolver for fulfilling these queries with your existing data. And then GraphQL provides a complete and understandable description of the data in your API. That's a schema definition language. It provides the entire description of your data, and it gives the client the power to ask for exactly what they need and nothing more, which solves the problem of overfetching and underfetching and makes it easier to evolve APIs over time. So you don't have to version the APIs to support different things. And the powerful developer tools is what they mean by the schema doc. Okay, this is the exciting part. Let's build a GraphQL API server. And how are we going to build a GraphQL API server? So let's say I want to build a production-ready GraphQL API server. These are all the design considerations I have to take into account. Like my API should have minimum latency, should be efficient enough, even if there are multiple requests coming in. I should be able to scale and should be efficient. And how am I going to authenticate my APIs? Do I have a security? Do I have an API token, or am I going to do auth2 like user ID based or token based API? Or how am I going to manage the caching? For example, let's say my data is kind of static. I don't want to keep it very frequently. How am I going to do the caching? And the best part, the other part is which is overlooked is the monitoring. Your application can go live, but something goes wrong. Your monitoring, if you don't have the monitoring in place, you're going to spend a lot of time to recover the information. So we have to have a monitoring, and whenever I have to create something, then I have to share the documentation with the front end team or anybody who's using my API. So you have to build a documentation on it. And anyway, GraphQL is going to talk to different databases and data sources. So the integration between the API and the databases should be seamless. So I have connection is live between them. And the other part is like, let's say I want to build a real-time like subscription based API, then I have to make sure that the real-time is working always well. So that's too many things to check on. What if I have some service which provides everything out of the box, and there is some configuration where I can just tweak a little bit and change whatever I need. Like at least I can launch something production ready, and then I can tweak a little bit based on the load or based on the request I am having. Maybe I can monitor my request a little bit and then improve my API. So what if everything is packaged and provided, right? So the answer is AWS AppSync. AWS AppSync is one of the services provided by AWS to build a GraphQL API server. So everything is packaged and together. I'm going to show you like it. All the things whichever I have mentioned, the design considerations, it takes around 1 minute to spin up all the instances. So uh, this is kind of an extended version how the AppSync fits in, but this is kind of redundant. I'm just which puts in perspective of AWS. So this is our API server part, which is sitting between our front end and back end. So the back end can be any DB, any of the AWS services provided, or it can be other AWS services. It can be as other HTTP services, it doesn't matter. And then you have a schema and resolver to translate the data from here to here. And if you have worked on AWS, you know that the CloudWatch monitors your logs and metrics and insights, which is like provided out of the box and integrated with AppSync. So there are only 3 steps now. Since all the other are taken into consideration, I know that I'm going to build GraphQL API, so I have to define a schema that can be provided. So what the task at hand for me is like build a schema, and then what I have to define what are all the data sources I'm going to take, and then build a business logic on top of it. The to the data source, resolve the business logic out of it, and then give the fields that adhere to the schema. Okay, this is the demo part. I think we covered everything. So let us wish the demo goddess to bless us so that the GraphQL API works. So I've already logged in. This is my backup version. If something goes wrong, I'll just show whatever that's all I have already built. So let's say you have to remember all the design considerations that are taken into account. Let's say I'm going to take a create API. I'm going to build from scratch and then say start. So let's say this is women who code live demo, right? Okay. Okay. That's it. When you click on create, it took only this much time to create all those things. Let's see what are all the things that it had spun up. It provisioned the server for me. It gave me the API endpoint. This is an authentication token. Anyway, I'll delete it, but this is not meant to be shared. And then it default by provided the authorization key for me. I'm going to enable the logs. If something goes wrong, I'll be able to troubleshoot it in the demo. So yeah, I can enable the logs and then I can save it. So by default, it provisioned caching for me. I mean, it provided the caching solution. I just chose none, but you can choose caching for me for yourself. And then the schema. This is the place where we have to build the schemas, what are all the things that we are going to support. And then the data sources. So what I did was like I have built a table. So I'm going to use this as a data source, and then let's see what we can query about it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create something called events. Let's start with events data source, and then this is going to be a DynamoDB table. My API is going to talk to it. So I created in the Singapore region, and then my table is events. Okay, I'm just leaving the default here. So let's go and build the schema. So there is some basic thing. Let me remove this. So let's say I want to support query. right? Okay, I'm going to comment this out. Let's see that in a little bit. So I'm going to support query. So now I think I'm going to say type. I have to define query. What is a query here, right? So what are all the queries I'm going to support? Let's say get events, and this will return an array of event, right? Okay. So now what it says is like I cannot understand the name event because we didn't define what is an event. So what I'm going to do is like type event. So what is an event made of? I'm going to check the table. So the event is made of category, description, name, and schedule. So let me pull this all over. So let's say category, which is of type string, name, okay, and then description, and then look, schedule, right? Just for fun, I'm going to add one more field where the data source is not available. So I'm going to add something called location, just to show that the schema can have different values, though the data source is not having. So I'm just going to add this, and then I've done this. So now my GraphQL API supports this query, right? But where it will go and fetch the data, we just create the data source, but we didn't attach, we didn't say forget events, go to this data source, right? We didn't attach anything. There is a business logic we had to build. So what I'm going to do is like, I'm going to attach my data source here. This is my event I've created. So what I'm going to do is like, I want to have the list of all the events. In ideal production environment, you will not be doing this. I'm just going to pick existing template provided by AWS. So list all the
records in the database, and then return a list of items, which is what we need.
when
You want get key events, then
this is what you need. Get all the events. Okay, my saver is, my resolver is saved. So what we have done so far is I've created a schema and I have attached the business logic to query, to scan the items in the DB. I'm just going to verify whether the attachment is what it's created or not. So let's go to the query. I don't know why it's created query. Okay. Okay, it's let's remove this. So I have to query events. I have a category, description, location. I'm just going to pick only these things. Maybe description, I don't need it. So let's say, so this is what we got, right? I hardly spent any much time to get all this data. The only thing is like just to save time, I added the database in the table. Obviously, I have to assume that you have a data in the backend. So this is the one. So let's say I want to do location. Location is not available in the table. What happens? Let's see. So location will return null. Yeah, so it's happening, yeah, because it's location. Location is returning null because we don't have the data available. So let's say you have two different data sources. For example, like DynamoDB has a list of events, and let's say you have a MongoDB that has another list of events. The value is coming from MongoDB, but not in DynamoDB. So it's possible that you have value coming from one data source and not the other, and both of them are rendering from the get events. So you can have this field, which is an optional field. But the moment you make it mandatory, let's say I'm just going to go back here. Let's see how the schema definition checks it. I made the location is mandatory, but I'm not having the location. So I'm going back here and then say, call this. So I don't get the value, but I get the error saying that, hey, you cannot return null value because it's a non-nullable type. I'm expecting the value to be always present, but you're not sending it. That's why I'm giving you null. Right? Again, you can handle this. You want to partial data, you can handle this internally. I'm just going to remove it to keep working. So the first part is like REST API's get part, right? You query the data. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to update the data. So I have to do mutation, right? So let me do the mutation. Okay. So now again, it doesn't understand mutation. I have to tell what is the mutation I'm going to do. It's like I'm going to create a mutation. I'm going to create an event in the database, right? So let's say my mutation is create event, right? Okay, let's say create event. So event, what I have to do is like whenever I create an event, it's only one event. So let me return only that event I created. But if I have to create an event, I have to send all these values. So let me do one thing. Let me create the event. Send all the data. I think it makes sense. So I'm sending, if you have to send all the values, name, category, and description and schedule, um, it will return the item. So again, my schema I have created. Now my data source is the DynamoDB. So let me create the business logic, right? Creative. Okay. So now I have to select the database. Again, I'm going to put the existing item. So what I have to do is like whatever the values that are coming as attribute, it will be updated in the table. Only one thing I have to note is like the DynamoDB, when I created an uppercase. So it creates a random value. So I'm going to change it. Okay, done. Okay, my resolver is done. I'm going to go back to the schema. I like to double check it. My create event is added. So now let's go back and say add a mutation, right? Let's go back, add a mutation. So create an event. And after you create the event, return me all these things. Okay. So I have to give the value. So category, maybe I can call career. And then description is um, maybe personal branding, maybe. Name, what's the name of the event? Let's call it negotiate your salary. Okay. And then schedule is like maybe June 11th. Okay. So now there's a provision here. I can add a mutation. Yeah. So it's returning this event. It's updated. So the thing is like now I have to verify whether it's updated in the table. Either I can make a get events query or I can verify the table. It's easy for me to query. So let's see. Yeah. So career, negotiate your salary. Yeah. Let's not do the location. So let's do the description. What's available. Yeah. This is what we have created, right? So yeah. So we have created the mutation, and the last interesting part is the subscription. Subscription is something like it waits for it just subscribe to the change. So let's something will be new, but it will be very interesting. Uh, so you don't have to use like Firebase based or live data store if you use GraphQL. So I'm going to use subscription, and then I'm going to define subscription. So how I'm going to define subscription is right subscription. Subscription can act only on mutation. So only when there's a change in event, you can subscribe to that event. That's what we normally do, right? We subscribe to a feed. The feed changes, you get a feed. So what I have to do is like, I have to name the subscription, let's say on create event. If whenever the event is created, get me the event. Okay. Now what I have to do, um, what I mentioned is like, I have to subscribe to the event. So I give a directive called AWS subscribe, which is a directive for AWS, but we have to use a subscribe even separately if it's a different flavor of GraphQL system. So now I can take multiple mutations. Currently, I have only one mutation, this create event. So what I'm telling here is like, hey, I'm going to have a subscription on this mutation create event. So whenever you create something, um, so I'll be notified. I just wanted to notify what the event that has been changed. This is useful in your live chat or any real-time updates like your stock ticker whenever something changes. You don't need a business logic here, but for the sake of demonstration, what I'm going to do is like I'm going to open something in a different event. So just to show. Okay, so this is a query. What I'm going to do is like I'm going to create a mutation. I'm just going to rename it like a different name. For example, let's say Tech Talk, right? And then let's do the subscription listening here. So whenever a client subscribes it, I'm going to remove this. Add a subscription here. Let me listen to when subscription happens. Give me a category and name maybe. So I'm listening to this event. So the moment the client listens to this event, it's like listening actually. So far there is no mutation happening. No one has updated the table here. So what I'm going to do is like I'm going to update the table here. The moment I update the table, it will the whatever I have updated, it will show up here. So let's show this. So I'm going to do this tech talk. I think we already made the statement. So now I created the category tech talk. I've just kept it everything. If you can come here, so you can see. So this is like a live change. I can directly do it. There are multiple ways you can do this. I mean, you can connect to multiple data source and then attach the schema. So in that case, what happens is like the same schema can connect to different data source. I'm just going to quickly show how to demonstrate this different data source. Just for the ease of use, I'm just going to call who are all the people who are using this, right? Uses data source. And then I collect the data source type as none. I'm going to hardcode the data. So now what I'm going to do, my schema, I'm going to support get users, which is going to be returned as string array. I'm going to demonstrate two different data sources because so far we are acting only on one data source. So, okay, so now obviously I have to attach the data source. I have to go to query and then say attach the data source. Picking the user's data source. I'm just leaving it as such. So for now, what I'm going to do is hardcode the value. These two are the values that will be returned. Darshana and Hari, just my niece and nephew, just to get them excited.
To do this. So you know what happens, right? The one is talking to the DB,
The other one can be a lambda or can be anything. Now I'm going to quickly query this data. Let's do the query. Add a query, and let's remove this. Let me get the users. See, I got it. So basically, it's the same GraphQL schema is getting the data from different source. So if I get events and then say get a category of all the events, what happens is like two different data sources are being connected by this GraphQL API server. One is the hard-coded value which I gave, and the other one is the DB, and then I got the result. You can have any number of data sources. I'm just going to show what are the other options you have. You can just choose any of these things. And AWS Lambda is the one can connect to all the AWS services. So if you want to connect to different services, you can use the AWS Lambda, and then if it's not listed in one of these values. This wraps as the demo. Yeah, so I think, yeah, we got the blessings of our demo goddess. So this is some references. I would suggest you to look at AWS AppSync specific blog to build a GraphQL API. I created a Medium blog using only Lambda as a data source. Currently, I didn't portray it, but you can choose this. This is using infrastructure as code. You don't have to go to the console. You can just clone the data and then install this GraphQL API. You can find my code in GitHub, and then follow me on Twitter if you have any questions. This is my personal website where I tweet about my AWS services. Thank you, everybody, and let me know if you have any questions.
Well, thank you, Pradheepa. I guess the demo got really answer your prayers. So we're going to start the Q&A. There's already 2 questions, and if you have any, just put them in the chat, and we're going to reply. So the first question was from Palaksha, and she asked, is GraphQL the same as an OpenSpec API like Swagger 3.0?
OpenSpec API is kind of REST. I wouldn't say it's same. It's a different flavor, I would say. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
And the second question is from me, actually. And I wanted to know which kind of issue did you run into when you first created a GraphQL API?
Oh, that's the most common question. It's like to understand if you're coming from REST API, this is a great learning curve. So to understand how a subscription works and why I have to use this GraphQL API, it's better for me to use the REST API going forward, right? So why would I have to go to GraphQL API? What's the decision that makes you to go to GraphQL API? Because if you already have a REST API, you have to migrate to GraphQL API, and why is there a need? So most of the time, we have to work with how do you migrate the existing things, and is it worth it? Uh, if you are going from REST API to GraphQL API, if you have already modeled most of our data sources when we have something provided by REST API, we are all building as resource based. So what happens is like when you want users, you go to take the user and you go to different data source, and then you build the resource information. And then if you have a repository, you go have a different data source and you go to. Basically, our data model is built on top of the REST API. So the first challenge which we faced was changing the model to fit to the GraphQL API, and then that is a big step. So you have to really think through it whether you need it. The other advantage, what I would say, is like if you're not sure, just connect a REST API to GraphQL API. But it's a two-step process. So you'll get what you need, and then you can work towards it. So if you already have a REST API, you can move towards, you can migrate, connect your REST API to GraphQL API. If not, you have to model your entire schema in terms of the graph. That's a bit of learning curve, but the main advantage is like you reduce the number of payload, the size of the payload. There was a good documentary about the GraphQL, why they built it. It's built by Facebook. So you can just look at the documentary. It will get exciting. Why is there is a need for it? If you have a network latency, like on the third world countries, like developing countries, they don't have a very good data. And if you're accessing from your mobile, getting all the data and then parsing it is like, let's say you're ordering something from McDonald's or something. Imagine they have a REST API, and then it gives all the information of all the data across all the regions. We don't need it, right? Though the backend handles it, it might be something like you don't need it. So that's the change you have to look forward. And then that's the first challenge, I would say, migrating from one service to the other.
Thank you. There's another question from Priya, and who asks, can we have a filter on specific row? You showed us a filter on columns.
You can do that. So I didn't mention specifically because I don't want to get into multiple details about it. There is something called filter itself, supported by GraphQL, where you can send. Remember, you saw that create event when you say you send those values. In that, you can mention like, hey, create event only if the date is like new or something like that. You can apply a filter on top of it. So that is like applying on top of rows. So column with filtering and creating the rows, it's still possible. Yeah.
And Parag again had a second question, which is GraphQL API open source and free to use?
Yeah, it's open source. It was actually built by Facebook, which I already mentioned. Then they open source the entire project. So there are multiple implementations of GraphQL APIs. The most popular one is Apollo GraphQL API Server. AWS AppSync internally uses Apollo GraphQL API Server. There is also Hasura, the other API servers, which is open source. So you can go ahead and use it. Apollo GraphQL, you can use it. It's open source.
That was the last question we had. Okay, yeah, I think that was the last question we had. Don't know if anybody have any question. Speak now or speak never. Okay. Yeah, I think that was all. Well, thank you, Pradheepa. That was very interesting. And thank you all for attending the talk as well. I invite you all to check out the other session, the networking feature, as well as the expo booth. And with that, I don't know if Pradheepa have a parting message for all of us.
Thank you so much. Thanks all for all the kind words. I hope I understand the GraphQL APIs, and then this gives you a nudge to get it started. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter, and then this will be a recorded session, I guess. So you can, have this recorded and then play it around. Okay. Thank you.
Actually,
thanks a lot.
We do have a last minute question from Yvonne. What level of knowledge of JavaScript do we need to have to understand GraphQL?
Oh, That's the fantastic part. GraphQL is like language agnostic. So if you know how to build, let's say the REST APIs, if you're already familiar with it, the basic level of language is what you need it. There is no special skill set for building a GraphQL API. Whenever let's assume that you know how to make a REST API call. Since you mentioned JS, let's say you're using Axiom to fetch an API call. You're going to do the same thing. Same fetch API, call the API header, how you're going to post your data, you calls post, and then the payload, what are you going to query? You query that, and then in the authentication header, probably you'll send a token or API key. It's going to be similar. There is no specific thing you're going to learn in terms of language specific. The only thing is like the thinking in terms of graph, thinking in terms of how you're going to query the data. This is going to be like very interesting for the front-end developers, because GraphQL puts the front-end first, because that's where you're seeing the interface. So you know what you're asking, you know what. So in the REST API thing, you have to build an object and then just pick only the object which you want and to display. Here it doesn't have to be. You can build your query whatever you want and then need it. So there is no specific skill set for it. You just have to think in terms of the objects, whatever you're referring in terms of graph. That's the only knowledge learning curve there is. Nothing much.
Thank you again for answering this last minute question. I think we're done for today, for this talk at least. And I really encourage you to check out all the other amazing talks that we have at the Connect 2021. Thank you, Pradheepa, again.
Thank you.